What you really want is you want to know right away what's helping you and what's not, and then focus on the ones that are helping you and get as much recovery as you can. And that's the hope that the brain gauge gives you, is it gives you the knowledge that you need to sort those things that work from those things that don't.
Especially when we have a brain who doesn't put off fire alarms on its own system. Hey guys, welcome to Do Not Take the Pill, a place where we aim to provide hope in true healing from chronic suffering by treating the system, not the symptoms. I'm Jess, and if you care about your brain, you better tune in because we're going to talk about all things brain inflammation, brain gauge. How do you know if your brain's on fire? Okay, this actually, when your brain is inflamed, it actually happens to be the cause of so many neurodegenerative disorders, mood disorders, traumatic brain injuries, ADD, etc. The list just goes on. So we are continuing to learn about how the brain gets inflamed, but how do you actually know? We don't, because our brain lacks these pain receptors to say, hey, I'm on fire. It can tell you when your pinky toe hurts. It can tell you when you have a stomach ache, when your joints are inflamed. We feel those things. But your brain itself doesn't actually send off the fire alarms. So today we're going to hear about this from biomedical engineer Bob Dennis. He's an expert in so many different areas and one of the smartest guys I know because he's literally done everything. So welcome, Bob, and thanks so much for being here with all of us.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. So,
well, here, Bob, I'll start by saying the brain, it's absolutely fascinating. First off, so what you do, you can validate this for me, but it blew my mind researching that the brain really doesn't tell us when the brain's on fire or inflamed, right? The brain can tell me that my pinky nail got tore off, my pinky toe hurts, my stomach hurts, I have inflammation in my joints hurt, but my brain is not going to say, hey, you're inflamed. It's going to come out in different chronic ways. Depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, ADD. Is this a fair statement that most brain diseases are actually stemming from inflammation?
Yes. That's actually, well, both of the things you said are correct. First of all, I think it's a fair guess, an educated guess to say very many problems arise from neural inflammation. A lot of that central neural inflammation, which would be your brain and your spinal cord. It's also true to say that the brain is really it's terrible at telling you when there's something wrong with it. It's like every other, it seems counterintuitive, right? This thing made of all these neurons, it kind of can't sense when there's anything wrong with it. It's not like other tissues where if something's wrong with it, virtually any other tissue, it will send a very clear signal to the brain. But when there's something wrong with the brain, you see it more as a kind of a different symptom, right? Which is very strange. That always struck me as very strange. And that's thinking about that is not how I got into studying the brain. Is one of the areas that I'm working on, because I work on these things as an engineer, right? So I'm not a biologist per se, but I work with biologists all the time, and so I pick up from them like the different problems and challenges they have, and then I try to measure it or help them manage it somehow technologically. And that was the big problem with the brain, was that it can't tell when it's hurt. That's what's so weird about it. I'd say that's like one of the strangest facts about the brain is that it's using your brain to try to assess the function and well-being of your brain is a really bad strategy. You have to use other things to measure your brain function.
It's just so interesting. I want to do a deep dive on that exact statement. But first, tell us how you got here. Tell us your history, your background. How did Bob Dennis become a researcher, a biomedical engineer in understanding different systems, especially the brain?
Those are great questions. And I oftentimes wonder, how did I get here? Sort of like a Talking Heads song from the 80s or something. But this is how I got here. I started growing up, I thought I would be a toy designer. I thought I would design toys for Fisher-Price, something cool like that. The little Fisher-Price bow with little wooden people on it. So I always thought that was really cool. And I wanted to be a toy designer my whole life. I've just never designed toys. I just keep running into these needs, these unmet needs, where people and circumstances keep pulling me into doing other things. Like when I was an undergraduate at University of Michigan, I know you're a Michigan State person. You told me.
Yes, I am. Go green.
Both of my sisters and my brother went there, and I love Lansing and all that stuff. I don't feel any crosstown rivalry here. So I'm not, nothing like that. But when I went to Ann Arbor, I went with a friend of mine to a job interview. I wasn't there to interview, actually. I just went there because we were having a blizzard. It was the middle of February. The deal, right?
Winters in Michigan, listeners, they can be tough.
It was a great company, and he wouldn't go to it. It was a great aerospace company called Hughes Aircraft Company. So I went with him, and I wasn't dressed up for it or anything. I just had a big gaudy Michigan sweater on and everything. Everybody else was wearing suits. So they said, well, you're here. Why don't you just take an interview? So I did. And I got the job, actually, which is really weird because my roommate who I walked there with, he did not. He's really angry at me about this. I think he still is. But it was for missiles, guidance systems for, this is the 80s. Remember, I don't know if you're not old enough for this, Ronald Reagan space stuff, Star Wars thing. So I really cut my teeth as an engineer designing missile guidance systems. What the heck? That's a long way from designing toys, right? And so one thing led to another, and I kept getting all these super high tech, demanding jobs, and I ended up working for a car company and doing all these things related to automatic transmissions and stuff. And then I worked for I went back to graduate school to get my PhD and worked for NASA. I think you know that. I worked for NASA because literally one day they called me up and said, hey, could you help us try to grow cells in space in zero gravity? And I said, sure, I don't know anything about it. I can try to help. And what they wanted was electromagnetic fields to try to stimulate cell growth. And that's how I got into this whole PEMF field. I was hired as a consultant by NASA. I never actually worked for NASA as an employee. I was always a consultant.
We're going to have to dive into PEMF here in a couple of minutes. But as you're saying, you got into the PEMF field.
That's how that started.
Yeah. Explain to our listeners briefly, PEMF. What is that?
Pulsed electromagnetic fields. And NASA was absolutely convinced that if they could apply the right pulsed electromagnetic fields, they could stimulate cell growth. And I said, I think that's kind of hokey. I don't think it's very good. They wanted me to do it anyway, so I reviewed the science for them. It was 660 papers from all over the world. I had to have some translated from Russian, for example. And it was terrible science. It was really low quality research. And I told them I didn't think it was very good, but they asked me to try to build something. So I helped them run a really good experiment. I was trying to I wanted to prove to NASA that this whole electromagnetic effect on cells was just not true. Turns out I was wrong. It was the very first time that I was really wrong about something in biology. And we did the experiment. It came back with really strong effect on cell growth and gene expression if you apply the right kind of electromagnetism to cells. I didn't believe it. So I said, no, we got this. This must be a mistake. Let's rerun the experiment. So I repackaged all the equipment, did a double-blind experiment. We did it again, got the same result. So the answer was I was wrong. And there is a huge beneficial effect of the right kind of electromagnetism on cell growth and gene expression.
So take that, and I'm sure your journey winds and weaves even a little bit more, but I'm saying, how does a guy go from NASA, PEMF, and then relate that and suddenly start looking at the brain, right? And build a machine. And so how I view you right now is you see things in systems. So you can work on so many different things from the human body to outside the human body because your brain appears to really see things in systems. How did you become an expert in looking at the system like the brain?
Well, that's the thing. I was asked, once again, it's sort of like NASA. I was asked by a friend of mine here at UNC because I moved from Michigan to University of North Carolina here. And he was the one who told me, the brain is terrible at telling me if it's been injured. And he had been studying for like 25 years how to test the brain non-invasively using basically sensation on your skin, the way your brain interprets touch, because every point on your skin relates to one point on your brain, somewhere in your sensory cortex.
Hmm.
And if you know that, you can, stimulating the skin just by touching it, doesn't even have to be electrical, just touch it. It's exactly the same as touching one spot on the brain. Exactly. And so that allows you to do things like, sort of like poking the brain and seeing how it responds. And he needed a really precise way to do this to a couple of points on the skin, and that's right up my alley. I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll help you build that." So we built one. It worked really well, and then I built a series of four more advanced ones for him, and then that turned into a product called a brain gauge.
So let me step back. Is the brain gauge something that helps you assess whether you have a chronic condition you know about or your brain is on fire, it is inflamed and you don't know? The
Well,
brain gauge can help assess that where you're at.
it doesn't tell you specific things like inflammation, but what it does tell you about is brain function, cognitive function. So, like, not just cognitive function, but cortex function, functioning cortex. Because what we can do is basically tap on your fingertips in different ways, different intensity, different frequencies, different sequences, and that brings into play different functions in your brain for timing and detecting amplitude and everything. And by doing that, it seems pretty simple, but it's sort of like reading an eye chart, right? You got, letter E. Is it pointing left or right or up or down?
Yeah, you're right. It's the letter
Here,
E. Yep.
you can look at an eye chart and say up, down, right, left, for progressively smaller letter E. And then all of a sudden you get this precise, optical prescription to correct your eyesight. An optical prescription is sort of like a telescope, or a microscope, just from reading a piece of paper. Because, see, your mind does all this your brain does all this processing of the visual information it gets, and then by just simply seeing how your brain can respond to a visual stimulus, you can essentially calculate what you need to do to correct a person's vision. It's actually, in a lot of ways, it's more accurate than just doing a laser scan of your cornea or something, because it takes into account the whole brain function for vision, which has a lot to do with how well you can see. So it takes all that into account by doing this simple stimulus. And it turns out that we can measure brain function and whether you have lost your ability to focus, or whether you're fatigued, or whether you're getting bad temporal order, time order judgment. Um, we measure 8 different brain functions just by tapping on your fingertips. And it works really, really well. For example, when people get head injury, like concussions, we've been tested by the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy. We're actually funded by the U.S. Navy. There was a huge study in the military base, the NATO base up in Lundstall, Germany. And they tested us against every other way to measure brain function, every other way. And we could detect concussions between 93 and 98% of the time.
Wow.
And the next best thing was 62%.
Wow. So when I think of concussions, I think of traumatic brain injury. And so you're really tracking
And
which,
that's like inflammation, right? That turns
yes.
out to be brain inflammation. That's why don't want to interrupt you, but we're not saying it's brain inflammation, but we're detecting all the clues that point to that, and we're doing it really, really accurately.
So now take that and roll that over to a patient struggling with Alzheimer's. Is that something that the brain gauge can maybe even just track progression, or is that something it can track severity? Explain that.
That's a great series of questions. I could unpack what you just asked me for like 3 or 4 hours, maybe.
Well, that's our next episode.
Let me tell you how sensitive this is. If you take cough syrup, just cough syrup, we can detect that change in your brain function. We have the most sensitive device for detecting changes in brain function anywhere on Earth. And I'm not just saying that. This is like, when we compare it in a controlled experiment done by other people, very large experiments, globally done, testing everything, we always come out on top. We always do. Because we're doing this kind of testing that goes directly to the brain. We're not doing, like what other brain testing things are, like an MRI. Well, that shows you like a picture of the brain, but not its function. right? It doesn't show you
Hmm.
how the software is working. It just shows you if there's a lesion. Did you know the definition of a concussion is that there's a brain injury that you cannot see on an image? So no matter how many MRIs or X-rays or whatever you take, you'll never see a concussion because by definition, if you can see it, it's not a concussion. It's still something much worse, right? So you need something that can very finely detect um, alterations in brain function, and that's what we have with the brain gauge. That's what it does. And so going to your earlier questions and statements, yeah. So we think we can detect Alzheimer's about 15 years before it becomes clinically apparent. So imagine this: you've got something that says, hey, in 10 or 15 or 20 years, you're going to have Alzheimer's, and we can track that progression. There's specific numbers we can put on things that tell you that it's going towards less and less function. We really can. Overall, you end up getting or reduced what's called a reserve cognitive capacity. It's a cognitive
Hmm.
reserve with less and less of that as you get older. So you're still seem like you're doing fine, but you don't have a whole lot of backup. And then if you go under anesthesia or you get a tiny injury or something like that, all of a sudden people can just fall off the cliff, right? But we can tell you as your brain can't even detect it. Remember, the brain's terrible at telling how its own well-being. But we think, based on what we've done now, we haven't had a chance to do a 15 or 20-year study, but all indications are that yeah, we could tell you 15 or 20 years out if things are slipping. But what's most important, I think, is once you know that, you can start trying things. Like say you try taking nootropics. Are they helping you? We can tell you. you know,
Hmm.
you can try doing yoga. You can try eating organic food. You can try different things. And whatever's helping you, it will show up on the brain gauge. And then you can keep doing that. And you can see. So the way we think Alzheimer's will be managed in the future is that people see it coming 10 or 15 years out. They make some lifestyle changes. They don't have to
Hmm.
take drugs. They make lifestyle changes, and then they focus on those that seem to be helping them because they can detect it. They put numbers on it with a brain gauge, and then they can guide their own return to robust health. That's what we're shooting for with that.
So the brain gauge is very much so a tool to help people assess where they're at. And then it gets very, very fine tuned to where you
You
can
know,
see
it allows
pretty
you to make.
much. Yeah, pretty much exactly. So what about other conditions? If someone's listening out there, ADD, autism,
We
depression,
have a
is
lot of
that?
papers on that. We have a lot of papers on ADD. Our first papers were on that. A lot of them, and we can actually tell. We can tell different locations and types of people on the autism spectrum because it's a whole spectrum. It's not one thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that within a few days, we can tell you if a child is responding to medication right away. Within a few days. If you don't have that kind of measurement, then you have to wait a few months to look for behavioral changes, which are trailing indicators of whether or not that medication is correct. Whereas we can tell you, oh, it's the right medication or the wrong medication, the right dose or the wrong dose within a few days. We've published this, right? And so yeah, we've got information for that. We've published about 80, I think, peer-reviewed papers on this. So this is one of the most well supported scientifically technologies that you could possibly imagine. I mean, there are drugs and devices on the market now, and by the way, ours is FDA cleared, but there are drugs and devices on the market now that have like one or two or three peer-reviewed papers. We've got like 80 that we've been involved in writing, and there's probably an equal number that other people have written using our device without us being on it. So there's got to be well over 100 papers supporting our device. The thing is, we haven't had a chance to test it for every conceivable neurological problem, but we can detect toxicity, cognitive effects of certain drugs, like cough syrup, caffeine. We can detect alcohol, right? Um, we can detect if somebody's on the autism spectrum. We can even detect if a person's faking it. We had a guy run out of testing one time because he'd been on disability for like 3 or 4 years because of his autism, which he did not have. And we were able to prove it. Sorry, dude, you're doing just fine. And our device is designed so that you can't fake it, right? And we think it's going to be really revolutionary. I mean, because you can use it for telemedicine, like a doctor could be treating somebody 8,000 miles away, and they instantly get their data. The data is analyzed, goes right back to you instantly. You can take this test every day. It doesn't cost a lot of money. In fact, it wouldn't cost anything if you had a device. You just take it every day as much as you want. It doesn't cost anything.
So explain this. If I'm a listener right now and I have a very baseline knowledge of what the system looks like, I've seen it before, but paint the picture. What would someone be walking into when if they say, I suspect A, B, and C is either in of a chronic condition that could be coming my way, or I currently have a chronic condition. My brain is inflamed. I know it is. I want to learn more about this. I want to see this product. Explain what are they walking into?
Well, the first thing I do is I have you go do a Google search for Brain Gauge, BrainGauge, and you should go right to the Brain Gauge, our webpage, and it will have references to all of our papers, 70 or 80 of them, all these different studies that we've done, all of our certifications, all the things that we've been things that we've been tested against. We went up in a competition for the General Electric NFL Head Health Challenge in 2014 when we just started developing this. And we won the competition against 129 other competitors from 27 other countries. These things like smartphone apps. Smartphone is not designed to measure properly, to test your brain. It doesn't matter if there's an app for that. It actually doesn't work. And this has been published by us and others that these things just are not accurate. So like tablets and iPhone apps and just regular computer like mice and keyboards, they do not work for doing the testing you need to do. You need to have a specific device. So our device looks like a computer mouse. If you go to our webpage, Brain Gauge, just type it in and it'll take you there. It looks like a computer mouse just because computer mice are ergonomic, but it's actually got about $70,000 worth of neurological testing equipment crunched, a room full of it crunched into a mouse. It took us like 10 years to figure this out, but it does these very precise tests. Like it can do a movement of less than a millionth of a meter, less than a micron, in less than 1 millisecond. So it gets really precise measures or really precise stimulation on your fingertips that your brain then amplifies and it interacts, and then it will tell you like how quickly you're reacting and what your accuracy is and your neuroplasticity and stuff. So when people walk into this, as you say, what they're getting is the only on earth, the only precise way to measure brain function. There really isn't any other device like it. Everybody wants to give you a survey or hand you a smartphone and say, do this. These things don't work. They will tell you they do, and they have big marketing things and everything. But when they actually take them and actually test them, none of these things actually work, except for ours. Ours works very well, 93 to 98% of the time. It's dead on accurate, which is 50% of the time is what you get with a coin flip. Okay. There are actually devices for sale that are only accurate 37% of the time. They're less accurate than a coin flip. And that's a fact. And they have tremendously strong marketing, and they lobby to senators to get funding for their further research, but they just don't work. But we have the best technology in the world, bar none. We can prove it. Had the tests done. We've done competitive tests by third parties. So what they're walking into is, if you want to know that if there's something wrong with you physically, like your blood pressure, right, cholesterol or something, you get a test, you get a number. You get a test that's repeatable. If you want to know something's wrong with your brain, you can get a test. You can use a brain gauge, and it can give you a number. And then you can retest as often as you want, several times a day, once a month, whatever you want. And then you can track changes to your brain function when you try different things.
Now, someone says, okay, I'm interested in this. This sounds amazing, right? Frankly, it's fascinating. As I said earlier, the brain's fascinating, but then to be able to relate a touch point on your skin to a point in your brain and then put that into a mouse looking brain gauge and say, now we're going to understand where you might be going from a brain inflammation standpoint and what this could look like down the road, because we understand the brain from a different level through this machine. Is that something somebody would purchase, or is that something someone would
Yeah.
work alongside an
Yeah, totally.
integrative
Well,
practitioner?
you can do either. So we can sell FDA approved models to doctors who only deal with FDA approved stuff. We can sell you exactly the same thing. Uh, you know, we could sell the same thing to a consumer that's not FDA approved. So you're not buying something that's FDA approved because it's not doesn't have the same paperwork as the physically identical model that is FDA approved. That's what FDA approval is all about is the right paperwork. Okay, so you can get a very accurate test. You can do it at home by yourself. You can do it out on the field, like playing soccer, right there. One needs a laptop and this mouse-like thing. You can do it in your doctor's office if they have one, or you can do telemedicine where your doctor's thousands of miles away and you take this test every day at home, and then your results are shared with them if you allow that. Yeah, you can do it any way you want. Let me sort of tie this together, right? Because I was talking
Yeah.
about PF earlier. So we did a study a few years ago, about 3 years ago, on head injury, people who had chronic unresponsive head injuries, serious concussions, right? They were not responding to any treatment. We used this PEMF system that I had developed, which I've been able to prove through third party testing reduces inflammation. Then we used the brain gauge to test people. And 8 out of 8 people that were in our study, we had 8 people who were not responsive to anything that anyone had tried with them. Whatever it was, acupuncture, nutrition, medications, anything like that, for like 6 months or longer. They're in really bad shape. 8 out of 8 of them got completely better with PEMF. 8 out of 8. One person was in such bad shape he couldn't even finish the brain gauge test the first time he took it. Within 2 months, he was completely back to normal.
So the beauty, how you're tying this bow and how I'm interpreting this is that you take a brain gauge, let's say traumatic brain injury, concussion. Take a brain gauge, and then you utilize PEMF to address the inflammation. And then as you are addressing the inflammation, you're continuing to take the brain gauge to say, I can know within minutes, within hours, within days, weeks, is this condition improving? Is my brain getting stronger? Am I doing the right things, taking the right supplements to get my brain in optimal health?
That is correct. That is exactly right. We can use the brain gauge for guidance of treatment, not just detecting the initial injury, but also are the things that you're doing to help healing, are they actually helping? And with PEMF, I can tell you, we have the data. We can prove it. We had our hands off too. Somebody else was taking the data. So, there it is. And for those 8 people, they went from a treatment success rate with regular treatments of 0% to all of a sudden 100% PEMF. You can draw whatever conclusion you want to from that. And I'm certainly not saying anything works for 100% of people 100% of the time, because that's not true. But it certainly seemed to help a lot of people. And a lot of people who were not in that study have tried it and have had the same results. And they can prove it with brain gauge results, right? They can, not only did they say, wow, I feel better. Wow, I can function again. Wow, my activities of daily living are better. They can actually assign numbers to their cortex function.
So where I see this going is, you mentioned the term revolutionary, but what I want to provide is just hope for people who know that they have someone in their family suffering with either neurodegenerative disease, mood disorder. Not only can we start tracking our brain's health, revolutionary, because we can not only do it where are you at now, but where will you be going, right? We can do it in predictive measures according to the studies and the work you're currently doing. But then we can also treat it. We know a lot of the health issues that we struggle with on the day-to-day are all from inflammation. They stem from inflammatory issues. The brain's no different. It just can't tell us the same way that our joints can tell us. And so we can proactively predict these things, aka it can be revolutionary, and we can also treat them with PEMF. And then per what I hear you say, there's not one approach, We walk beside someone in the integrative space. We walk beside someone who's going to look at you as a whole person and say, hey, I see this. I see this is going on from your body. Let's take a deeper dive into root cause and heal it. Right. And that could be brain gauge tracking, PEMF treating inflammation, and then whatever other detoxing or supplements or whatever else they need to walk beside them to
Absolutely.
heal.
It's almost certainly a number of things. Like
Yeah.
it can be behavior, like, hey, stop playing football. You're just,
Yeah.
it's just working for you. The NFL, by the way, even though they were delighted with our technology, that was also later that year, like 2 months later, there was data showing that 110 out of 111 professional football players had head injury. So they
Well,
wanted
that's
to
a very high percentage.
it's out there. You can look for it, like percentage of NFL. So they wanted to sweep that under the rug. The problem was that our device would show that.
Yeah.
So that would be like the end of the NFL. So they very quickly said, no, 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 we're not interested in you guys, right? Because it worked too well. So you can look at that one, any way you like. Either, wow, you get the knowledge, it tells you something, even if you don't want to know. The truth, it will tell you the truth. Like we've had a number of people who were integrative people who are like, very pro nootropic. And one guy said to us, well, is this going to prove that my nootropic works? Because he had a special protocol. And we said, no, but it'll tell you whether it works or not. And if it doesn't work, it will tell you it doesn't work. And he stopped contacting us right there because he was not interested in knowing the truth. He was interested in having something to bolster his marketing campaign.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't help you with that. I can help you with the truth if you're
Yeah.
interested. Some
Yeah.
people say, oh, it's remarkable. You can find them if you look hard. But there are some people out there who really do want to know the truth. And so, like, if you're truly a person who wants to heal somebody, you want to know, okay, I'm going to try 5 or 6 things. What one or two of them are really critical helping this person? And what 3 or 4 of them, not really helping. So we don't have to burden that person with them, the cost and the complexity of it. Let's focus on the things that are really helping.
And then diagnostically, how do we know it's helping? We use the brain gauge.
We use the brain gauge, right? And the brain gauge is very, very helpful because it's very it tends to show changes in cognitive function within minutes or hours, as opposed to taking months, weeks or months for something to show up behaviorally.
Now
So let's dial in.
with cognitive dysfunction being on the rise, why is this not more mainstreamed? We look at Alzheimer's, we look at these epidemics that are just coming down on us with people who are struggling from the cognitive inflammatory issues. And I'm thinking, why hasn't this been a mainstreamed tool that is in more doctors' offices?
Well, part of the problem, part of the blame goes to me because I'm not a marketer. Okay, I don't market things, and I just simply tell the truth, and it sticks with whoever wants to listen to it, and whoever doesn't want to, that's okay too. So I don't have the loudest voice crying from the highest mountain, buy my product. I really don't like to sell things, but I like to tell the truth about things. And if stuff that I've worked on doesn't work, that's a lot of stuff I've done doesn't work. I'm happy to tell you about it. But the stuff that does work, also happy to tell you about it and prove it. And why has it not gone mainstream? Well, because there are many, many. The whole head injury, just like pain, like how could they possibly keep selling oxycodone when everybody knew there was a problem? It's neither safe nor effective, right? And yet people kept popping it, right? Well, everybody thinks that everybody's just hooked on these drugs, and it's just like this money making machine. But when we tested the PEMF system that I've developed at Florida Atlantic University for pain, all types of pain, a number of the people said, "Hey, I'm no longer going to take drugs," and they were like, they admitted they had an addiction problem, but their addiction was because they were in pain all the time. As soon as their pain stopped, and I mean, I can give you the dissertation for this. People can read it themselves. As soon as their pain stopped, their need for oxycodone sort of stopped. And it's sort of like that. Oxycodone and pain is a racket. You can make a lot of money on people who are in pain. You can make a lot of money on people who are diabetic. Why don't we talk about what you can do to reverse type 2 diabetes, right? I mean, not us, but as a society,
Yeah.
rather than getting trailed along with all these very expensive things you can buy for the last 40 years of your life. It's because there are what are called perverse incentives. And there's not really a good incentive for, like, for example, the NFL to use our device, because it proves that they have an extraordinary problem in a very dangerous sport that they have not addressed. The military loves our device because it allows them to say, "Whoa, this guy's hurt, so we're going to take him out of circulation before they get hurt worse." So certain groups really like what we're doing because the military doesn't make any money on damaged soldiers, right?
Mm-mm.
But sadly, the medical system makes tons of money on damaged people. And I don't want to be cynical about it, but caring for people with chronic conditions is much more profitable than just curing them. And that
Yeah.
is why we can't get anybody to do serious, effective research on antibiotics, but everybody wants to have another treatment for, name a chronic disease, because that's what makes all the money. Antibiotics, you get one bottle, you take, a couple dozen pills, and you are literally cured if you had an infection that antibiotic's effective against. They don't make any more money on it. But if it's something that lasts for the rest of your life, you know,
Yeah.
so that's the problem, is that brain inflammation, neuroinflammation, inflammation in general is related to many hundreds of what we think of as incurable conditions, which include chronic pain and about 200 conditions of aging, for example. So why is the brain gauge not mainstream? I think part of it is that it's a little too honest, and it just tells you, is what you're doing really helping or not?
Yeah.
And we have many examples. I just gave you one, but many examples of caregivers who instantly lose interest if you're a little too honest.
Yeah. I'm going back to that Alzheimer patient that I was talking about earlier on, just thinking, if you do a brain gauge and then you realize that the medications or the plan, whatever that plan looks like, actually isn't making a difference and there is no increase in function, then why be on that specific plan, right? So if the game is to keep somebody from a financial standpoint, financial gain standpoint, continuing to be chronically ill, why would we want something that would be that honest? Which is a
Well,
dismal look. And frankly, our point here on this podcast is to provide hope because there's so much hope out there. So I do want to say, hey, listeners, I mean, this is where we rally, right? We talk about advocating for ourselves in the doctor's office. We talk about walking with our physicians, not just being blindly guided by them, but this is where we bring this to the table. This is something I want for my mom. This is something that I want for my best friend who is struggling with cognitive inflammation. Or maybe I see it as an outsider, right? This is something I want for myself. And then we as consumers can move the market.
I'm doing this for your children and your grandchildren and my children and my grandchildren. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I work 10 hours on Sundays, and on holidays. That's why I'm working so much to get this just embedded in our all of human knowledge. It's for the future, right? So the hope
Yeah.
here is that truth will prevail. And the fact is, in my opinion, from what I've seen, you can effectively treat head injury. You can effectively treat about 95% of chronic pain, which, by the way, is the single largest affliction against humans. If you take everyone with stroke and cancer and cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, you add all those people up, that's about half the number of people that suffer with chronic pain. It is a really big problem, and it costs hundreds of billions of dollars per year just in the United States, chronic pain, because we don't have any mainstream ways to really
Yeah.
treat it, get rid of it. But with your message of hope, I'll tell you what. I mean, this is why I developed it for my own back. How did I get into it? I as a firefighter, I had a terrible back injury about 12 years ago. So I took my old NASA technology, tried it on my back, and my pain went from like 11 on a 1 to 10 scale down to like a 1 or 2. And so I'm wearing one right now. And so I'm drug free, pain free. But if I don't use PEMF, Then I can't, after about 3 days or so, I can't even walk. I'm just debilitated. But the thing is, I control it now,
Yeah.
and I have hope, and I don't have to have drugs to do it. And so there's hope for people with head injury. There's hope for people with chronic pain, but it starts with knowing what's working and what's not working. So for head injury, there's definitely things that work. The the problem is that it will take you a whole lifetime to sort through all of those to try to find the one that's going to help you. What you really want is you want to know right away what's helping you and what's not, and then focus on the ones that are helping you and get as much recovery as you can. And that's the hope that the brain gauge gives you, is it gives you the knowledge that you need to sort those things that work from those things that don't. And there are,
Especially when we have a brain who doesn't put off fire alarms on its own system. And
because
that is something that I just, that hit me in reading up on this. Our complex, beautiful brains can't tell us when they're hurting. And so it just adds that mechanism to help us diagnose or even just understand our brains from a different perspective.
yeah, well, that's the hope. That I think the ray of hope that comes from all of this is that knowledge is power, and if you have the courage to say, I really liked taking that nootropic or whatever. My joke is, monkey pick organic broccoli, right? It's like, okay, does it have to cost $4,000 a gram? Is it really going to help me? If it does really help you, that's great. But if it doesn't, you want to know, right?
Yeah.
And so you can take your resources, which is money, time, your effort, how many things can you do for yourself during a day? You know, you want to focus those on the things that will help you. And if you're able to do that, then you've got a great chance at healing. If you're constantly being pulled away by the siren song of things that don't work, and you're chasing every one of them down, then you're going to spend your whole life and a fortune on stuff that just doesn't help you. So the first thing you need to know is, does something help you or not? And that's what the brain gauge is for your brain.
All right. So I feel as if we need to have you back to talk all things chronic pain. It's a huge issue that we face. However, to tie this one up in just a beautiful little bow, give us 3 things that you think listeners today can implement in their life for just better health.
If you want to know if you're getting better, you need to measure it. Just like if you run 100 yards, you need to time yourself. Are you losing weight? You need to weigh yourself. Is your brain getting healthier? You need to measure its function, right? And your brain can't do that for itself. That's what the brain gauge is for. The brain gauge is designed not just to tell you where you are, but to tell you where you're headed. So if things are getting better, you'll know it. If things are staying the same, you'll know it. If things are getting worse, you'll know it. And then you can take action. So I would like people to have the knowledge that they need, the information they need to make the best decisions possible so that they can steer themselves away from long-term chronic issues with their brain. And a lot of that has to do with inflammation. And it's my opinion that PEMF can help with that. So that's one of the things you should consider. Um, I would say, if you have the knowledge of something that's helping you or not, the last thing I hope for you is to have the courage to be able to say, okay, even though that sounded really good, it just didn't work. I can prove it's not helping me. Now I can let go of that and move on to the next thing.
I love that. Thank you so much, Bob, for being on here. If listeners want to ask questions, they have specific questions, they want to go to you, how do they find you?
They can email me directly. I answer people every day. I probably answered 5 or 6 emails today. The best place to get information from me, though, is from our forum. And remind me, and I'll give you the email link to our forum. It's just a user discussion forum. And the great thing about that is when one person asks me an answer, and I go to the forum like 2 or 3 times a day, so I respond very quickly. When one person asks me a question, there might be like 3,000 or 4,000 other people who benefit from the answer. So the best way to ask me a question is in such a way that it's going to help you and thousands of other people when I give you the answer. And that would be on our forum.
Beautiful. So, to our listeners out there, if you love this podcast, please share with your family and friends, especially those who you know might benefit from measuring their brain and understanding what this actually looks like. Is your brain on fire? Please leave a comment on how you've dealt with your brain. We just would love to know how you guys out there are dealing with your struggles and your successes. Also, hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. We will see you next time on Don't Take the Pill. And thank you again for being with us, Bob. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.